What's up, everybody? Jensen Cummings here from Best Served Podcast. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. This is chat 4 of Best Served Fireside, our collaboration with Fireside at 5. We're going to be talking about the four walls, how real estate sector and restaurants can work together. And excited to have this team here today. We have Carissa Sargent, who is owner-operator of Brazen in Denver, Colorado. We also have Ken Himmel, who is a senior broker with David Hicks and Lampert. Jonathan Bush, who is a managing partner at LCP Development. And Amy Escala, who's a partner attorney at Mesner Reeves. Thank you to everybody for being on. We'll hear a lot more from our distinguished panel. First, I want to introduce a little bit about what we're going to be talking about. This series is based on an approach to the restaurant model called the Paragon Pillars. Paragon Pillars is something we've been working on to figure out a model for a more equitable, profitable, and sustainable restaurant industry. It's focused on two pillars: outcome goals for the industry that are very counter to a lot of industry norms. And we believe that creating stakeholders and communication infrastructure and investment and buy-in at every level within the restaurant ecosystem, there's an opportunity. The first is to take the employee retention and satisfaction from 73% turnover to 75% retention and satisfaction. I got to get this straight here, people. These are things I've come up with, yet somehow I can't even get them right. And then the second is to have 19% net profit, and when 7 or 8% is the industry standard. It seems an impossibility, but we believe with very smart people, there's ways to create the future of this industry, because we see how important restaurants are, not just culturally, but from a commerce standpoint in our communities. We've seen that played out through COVID more than ever. And so we see the need to invest in the future of restaurants. Okay. The partnership with Best Served Fireside comes with Fireside at 5. Gabby is here. They're doing amazing work. And I was very excited for the opportunity to work with them. So I'll let Gabby tell you just a little bit about their platform and their mission.
Wonderful. Well, we are so excited to be on our fourth chat with Best Served. So Fireside at 5, we originally began as a platform really for the community to connect with one another and speak about what they've been up to in their professional lives during COVID. And it was equal parts social, stimulating, and cathartic. And in the past 4 months, since we first started in March of this year, we have hosted over 75 different chats around 20 different industries. And it's really evolved more into a platform to amplify the voices of industry leaders and support their current projects. So of course, Jensen, that's where you came in. He came to us with the wonderful Paragon Pillar project that he was working on. And our Fireside at 5 team was so inspired by it that we wanted to partner with Jensen and Best Served and be in full support of the Paragon Pillars and use this to facilitate really important conversations surrounding those pillars and get the right people involved to improve the model.
All right. So we're going to be talking again, real estate and restaurants. My ultimate goal here is to really understand that it's all about communication. It's understanding the questions to ask each of you if you are in a restaurant and looking to evolve your restaurant, if you're looking to get into the restaurant industry, if you're looking for a brick and mortar space right now, to understand the questions to ask, to understand who's involved and all the boxes that you need to check, because it's a lot more than just having a great idea. It's a lot more than just being a talented chef. And sometimes we don't realize that until we're too far downstream. And so we're going to become in perspective from an owner who also has experience in real estate. And Carissa, we're going to have Ken, who's really on the brokerage side, that's out there prospecting real estate. Amy, who's looking at leases inside and out and understanding the legalese there. And we're going to dig into that a little bit. And then Jonathan is a unique perspective as well, because he's on the development landlord side as well as investing in restaurants. So we kind of have the whole ecosystem. I'm going to let each of my guests introduce themselves. Carissa, I'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Brazen and your work there.
Well, I am restaurant wife. So my husband runs the day-to-day operations, but I help facilitate on the back end a lot of the admin, hiring, firing, stuff like that, HR, and some of the other applying for PPP funds and stuff like all the not fun stuff side of restaurants.
So he gets to cook and entertain guests, and you do the hard work on the back end.
Do all the fun things while I'm on the back end doing paperwork. And then I'm running my own real estate business at the same time. So that's a little bit about what I'm doing in a nutshell.
Yeah, top level, just kind of from an ethos standpoint, when you think about your understanding of real estate and you think about your understanding of restaurants, what's something that, you know, a new restaurant owner or somebody looking to get into it needs to really understand? The one thing that was an aha moment for you, maybe when you recognized that when you got into the real estate side?
The real estate side of restaurants is a lot different than the residential side. So commercial real estate is very different. And I think you definitely need an advisor to help walk you through that. The negotiation period is a lot longer than I think many business owners anticipate it being, as well as the lease terms being pretty long, a long commitment, you know, 5, 7, 10 years. That's a long time to be a personal guarantor on a lease when, as we've seen, the market has changed so much in the last, we've been open almost 6 years now. So the restaurant industry has changed a lot in the last 6 years in Denver, and then COVID has changed it drastically again. So, you know, a 5, 7, 10-year lease is a big deal.
Yeah, and I think it's important to reflect on just the nature of people in the restaurant industry. We're very instant gratification. We come up with an idea, we make a dish, we sell the dish, the loop closes very quickly. So sometimes it means that we're really good tacticians, not so great at strategy all the time. So the long-term thinking, I think, is something important. And you mentioned advisor, having somebody trusted is important. And so a lot of times that process, you know, starts with a business plan, and make sure that you have the business plan. Once you get that business plan in place, you're going and talking to Ken Himmel. Tell us a little bit about kind of the work that you do with David Hicks and Lampert.
Sure. So we're a Colorado company, started about 21 years ago, and we specialize in retail only. And then myself, I was in the restaurant business for about 10 years with national chains, and then went into real estate with David Hicks and Lampert 19 years ago. So I guess I've been in this long enough to where I started as a restaurant guy. We used to call them that, and now all real estate people are restaurant guys, and because they're the only ones doing deals, and retail is struggling. So you know, I've been doing this for a long time in this city, and I grew up here also in Arvada, Colorado. So I've really seen the city change quite a bit. So it's been a pretty long run.
And for you, same thing, you know, understanding the restaurant side and the people that work in the restaurants. And when I mentioned the, you know, the tactician versus strategist, I know you know what I'm talking about. What's kind of, again, what's one thing that you think about the first time you sit down with a potential restaurateur, somebody that's looking at brick and mortar, looking at prospecting a space? What's kind of maybe 1, 2, the top questions that you ask them just to kind of qualify them?
Well, I think the tricky part is that you may not realize that you are signing a legal document that's saying you are agreeing to pay this rent for however long the base term is, and you know, sometimes that means you're putting your personal assets on the line to cover that, and I hope that they understand that before we get going too far, because it is a commitment and it's something that you can't get out of very easily. So it's definitely something you got to really have a strong understanding of what your business plan is. And then you have to have a commitment level to do whatever it takes to make it work.
Yeah. I want to jump over to Amy, because I saw you, Amy, shaking your head in complete agreement. You are signing a legal document.
You are signing a legal document.
We want to say that with emphasis. You are signing a legal document. I've signed multiple leases, and I don't think I still understood what I was signing.
And that's absolutely the hard part.
Yeah. So let's have you tell us a little bit about your work, and then I want to ask you the same kind of thing. Like, what's the one thing people need to think about now that we've established that they are signing a legal document? We'll go one layer deeper than that, but tell us a little bit about your work.
So I'm Amy Eskla. I'm a partner with the law firm Mesner Reeves downtown. We have a very extensive hospitality and restaurant practice. Personally, I would say 98% of my work is commercial leasing on the tenant side, mostly restaurant and hospitality clients. That's my day in and day out, and it sounds mundane, but the restaurant industry is such a fun sector to be in. In my past life, I worked for a decade in restaurants, hostesses, servers, bartenders, and I loved the atmosphere. I loved that, the vibe, and I miss it, but it's fun to be on this end. I think I have a really unique understanding of issues that go on with restaurants, that people who may not have worked in the industry don't quite understand, that I can transfer into lease language and make sure my clients are adequately covered on issues that people, again, who may not have been in that situation would think is a big deal. Like for trash example, I never thought I would talk about trash so much in my adult life, but here we are.
Yes, understood. All right, so you speak a little bit of restaurant. It's a completely different language, 100%. And so here's one thing that I want to say is I've had great relationships with attorneys over the years, but I kind of am in the relationship business. We're scared of attorneys, right? We feel like we can just figure it out. We're gunslingers a little bit. We can just figure it out, and we don't need the attorney until it's on fire. Unfortunately, every restaurant at some point will be on fire and need that, and it costs us way more downstream than if we had handled our business up front. I've seen it again and again and again. I've been guilty of it myself. So the relationship that you have, how can we help restaurants feel more confident in the relationship that they have with their attorneys? Solve that problem for us.
Perfect. I'll try. You are 100% correct. I think a lot of people see themselves as not a strong enough tenant to have any sort of negotiation power. So they just go ahead and sign anything that's put in front of them. And maybe 10 times out of 100, you'll have the hard pressed landlord that says, take it or leave it. We accept no changes. In the 6 years of practice I've been in, I have not encountered one of those landlords. I've heard of them. I think a big important piece is to see an attorney not as a luxury, but as a necessity up front, because to Ken's point and to Chris's point, you're potentially signing up for 10 years and an extension option. Some of our leases go 30 years. You're making a binding relationship with the landlord. So it's super important that you have someone to look over it and look over to ensure that your best interests are in place. One thing I think that really helps us, and it can really reduce the costs of your negotiation, is to have a really lock solid LOI in place that addresses the main business points of what the lease will be. Because at the end of the day, we as attorneys, we don't negotiate the business points for our clients. And if we're doing that back and forth, that just brings up the cost. So again, I think
LOI,
the main point,
just for everybody, letter of intent, right? That's a lot of times what Ken is going to be working on the broker's side. You're going to be working on that to make sure that what the expectation on either side is really sound. And then you're going to the attorney to then make sure that it's properly legally binding, that the language is proper, so that LOI is jargon that you're going to hear. It's important. It's very, very important to make sure that that's really solid. So I think what you're going to hear again and again and again, it's the relationships. It's that Ken and Amy work well together so that we shorten the lines of communication. So it's not a game of telephone. It's that the landlord and the broker are rock solid. So I think, again, this is going to be a theme. If you've ever watched any of my shows, it's humans and communication. That's it. It's the only thing. It's always comes down to it.
One last point, I think a major thing to recognize is at the end of the day, we're all trying to make a deal happen. We're not adverse as you would think. So you have to work with your landlords, and landlords have to work with their tenants to come to a deal that everybody can be happy with. And yes, you'll have to give on some points, and so will they. But at the end of the day, don't be afraid to protect your interests and make sure that those are covered in the lease. And I strongly suggest you hire an attorney to at least go through those with you.
Good. Jonathan, for you, working again in a unique position where you're on the development side, you're also then the landlord for a lot of retail, restaurants included, and then also investing. So you kind of see the full breadth of what's happening. You've seen great projects, you've seen bad projects, you've kind of seen it all. So tell us a little bit about your work, and then I want to just, again, a qualifying question a little bit, just kind of talk about for restaurants what you as an investor, as a landlord, are really looking for out of a tenant. But tell us about your work first.
Yeah, sure. I'd just like to say we are one of the landlords, and we allow 5 changes to our lease. Just so we're not totally rigid about that. I've told Ken we get 5 changes. Yeah, not to spend too much time, but as a brief background, LCP is a Denver-based, privately held real estate development and management company. The company was founded in 2004. Like Ken, I'm a Denver native, been here a long time, seen a lot of changes in the city. Most of what we do is really infill, mixed-use development and redevelopment. It's over a variety of asset classes. We've done everything from retail, office, apartments, condos, and industrial. So a little bit of everything. Current projects include a 140-unit apartment project at Santa Fe and Evans, has a retail component. We're the developer of Edgewater Public Market. And I think last count, we've got upwards of about 12 restaurants there. So, as a food hall, we're pretty heavily invested in the food side of the business there. And then we've got another mixed-use project in Capitol Hill, apartments, office, and we're adding 4,000 square feet of ground floor retail. So pretty much everything we've done has had some form or fashion of a retail component. At the end of the day, most of those, or at least half of that retail has been a restaurant in the past. I think, Ken's going to talk about that a little bit. I think we may see that change a little bit, but, we'll get to that conversation. I think we've always looked at restaurants maybe somewhat different as other users, and that they really are a partner. I mean, you've got to make sure that you're both aligned in what you want to do and how you're doing it. And I think in terms of, we view the infill development and redevelopment we do is we've been going into, I think, emerging, interesting markets, and to create the places that we want to create. I mean, it's the bars and the destination restaurants that bring that attraction and anchor a neighborhood. So we've always viewed it as a really critical part. They may be a smaller part of the development, but a very critical part of the development.
Yeah,
so,
a big tenet of the Paragon pillars is no longer to have transactional vendors, but partners at every level of the 107, 112, 132 line items of a budget. I think it's really important to have partners because we see the need to have partners and have the investment in restaurants because they really are pillars, again, of the community and of commerce. For you, I'm a budding restaurateur. I'm looking to get into one of your projects because you work on amazing projects. Edgewater, absolutely one of them. What are you looking for? What is something that you're, besides somebody who pays their rent, and some of the simple things, what is something you're looking for out of a potential tenant in one of your units?
Well, when you're in, I think the type of infill neighborhoods we're in, it's more likely going to be an independent restaurant, not a chain. And so in that case, then it's really, one, do they have experience? Are they, either on the food side or the business side? And in a perfect world, both. And candidly, how are they capitalized? And I think that's use the analogy all the way of, the worst thing you can do in a restaurant is run out a runway. So how are you capitalized? What are who are the partners? How much depth you have? But we do quite a bit of business with Ken, and one of the first things I always ask is, what have they done, and do they have a business plan? I mean, what are they going to do that differentiates them in the market? And then those as starting places, then I think if you check most of those boxes, then it's going to be a really fun experience.
All right, I like it. All right. So here's some of the topics just for everybody watching, listening, can kind of be aware of. I want to talk about scouting locations, a little bit about investments, the physical space itself, as that's definitely evolving. Leases themselves, the lease construction, and kind of what leases are looking about. There's definitely some clauses in leases that maybe had not been some of those movable objects that are absolutely on the table now. So interested in that. And then occupancy cost, which is one of the most important. We focus on prime cost, occupancy cost. You have to understand your occupancy cost and the way that you need to be able to manage that. And I think it's something we underestimate in restaurants quite a bit. So we talked about business plan a couple times. Carissa, I wanted to come to you a little bit as somebody, again, you pointed out you're doing a lot of behind the scenes, a lot of the admin, a lot of the real work in restaurants. The food and the beverage is the easy part. It really, really is. It's all the other stuff that we take for granted, that we don't understand, that we don't want to deal with, that you're dealing with. So touch on that a little bit. Business plan. give some perspective on how important the business plan is. Did yours evolve? Would you have rewritten it now? Like, give us a little bit of perspective from the owner side on the business plan.
Sure. Well, I'll speak to that, but it's not my
fair.
dream or my business plan.
Maybe
it's
that
my
means you have more
husband's.
perspective.
And a little bit of, I would say, perspective of it while it evolved. But yeah, he had a business plan to start with and an idea of concept for a small location, and small spaces are kind of hard to find in Denver. So we looked for quite a while. And then while we were developing the restaurant, you know, the menu develops and ideas develop, and do you do a kids menu or do you don't, or, you know, what do you do? How do you know that you're going to differentiate yourself? And my advice to him was always be true to yourself, create a concept that you want to go to. Don't water it down to try to please everyone, because you'll in turn end up pleasing no one and you won't be special. And so that was, I guess, when we were evolving the concept and the business plan, that's what we did. And the restaurant's named Brazen because, am I allowed to curse on here?
Go nuts.
Chris doesn't give a fuck.
There you go.
So that was like, it just defines who he is, and he's just going to do it his way. And that's Brazen is bold and unashamed, unapologetic. So
I love it.
That how that came about. And, you know, it also is a name that doesn't pigeonhole you into a certain style of food. You know, like if you have the word ginger in it, does that mean you're an Asian concept and
Right.
you can't or pivot to Italian if you needed to? If things change because of COVID and you end up being a takeout restaurant, are you stuck being a fine dining restaurant because of your name? You know, so things like that to think about. Jen Jasensky, everyone in Denver knows who she is, but she had one of the best advice ever that I've heard, and it was cooking's the easy part. Running the business is really where it takes some talent.
Yep. I could not agree more. And to the point, if be known for something or you'll be known for nothing. And you're known for nothing, you'll get gobbled up in this industry. Absolutely. Ken, let's come to you. Scouting locations. All right. So I have a solid business plan. I understand my concept. I don't give a fuck. I'm going to do my thing. And let's go. So let's talk about that for a second. You know, when you're looking at locations, I think one of the things that I'm most interested with the locations is especially like what neighborhood, what the demographics are, like where exactly are you pointing somebody if they come to you and say, I want to do, let's go very specific. I want to do a barbecue concept. Where then is the next part of that conversation when you're talking about scouting a location for them?
Well, I think it's funny how much things have changed even in the last 5 years of what was most important to restaurants and what's important today. I mean, we used to drive right by sites that didn't have parking 5 years ago, and now it's really not that big of a driver, which may change again because of COVID. But, you know, those kinds of parameters are always out there. But you know, the way that I would always recommend starting is that, you know, if you're specific enough to know that you're doing barbecue, which is great. So then I think you start off with knowing where your competition is and what your competition is. And so we'd create what we call a competitive map and show you every barbecue guy within a 2 mile, 3 mile radius of where you want to be. And then you can kind of scale that to, you know, how much that matters to you. And then I think that it's probably the step that most restaurant guys miss is that you have to look at the things you don't want to do. Otherwise, you'll never understand what it is that you do want to do. So if you're not seeing enough sites just in general, and it doesn't matter if they're the perfect site or not, then that's probably a big red flag to you. And then going on from that, you probably need to put out, you know, 3 or 4 offers to get one site. Maybe even 5 to 10, depending on how competitive your market is. So don't be afraid to negotiate. Letters of intent are non-binding on purpose so that you can understand the business terms that the landlord is trying to, you know, what his hot buttons are, what your hot buttons are. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. You're not offending anybody by negotiating. And I think that's intimidating for some restaurateurs, but it's well worth it. And it's not easy. You know, if you're out looking for the perfect site, I can tell you right now, it doesn't exist. So you got to start figuring out what parameters are the most important to you and hit as many boxes as you can.
Yeah, I could not agree with that more. I think, and on the adverse of that, sometimes we make big concessions because it's our dream, right? It's always been my dream to have a barbecue place. So all of a sudden you start cutting corners in your process because you just are chomping at the bit to get that going. So you're going to have to make concessions, understand and prioritize them. I think is really big. When you're thinking about like some of the KPIs, some of the key performance indicators of a location before the concept is even in there, traffic, visibility, you mentioned parking, demographics, competition, some of those things. Did I mention all of them? What are all the things that you're making sure that they are really aware of before they decide on a location just because they happen to like the location?
Yeah, I think that's important to know as many factors, components of the site as you can. And so demographics are great, but they're a snapshot.
Yeah.
And they might not tell you the traffic patterns or the trade area patterns, and it also definitely doesn't tell you what's happening next. And so you need to be aware of what the new developments are in the area. If something that is a driver in the area is planning to move next year and you weren't ready for that, if a major anchor is going to expand and you'll be in the middle of a construction zone for the next year, you need to know that. So sometimes it's not what's so obvious that's there, and typically that's what you should be using a broker for, because they're supposed to know more about what's happening than you do. But I think those specific factors are kind of the easy thing. I think everybody understands that if it's the kind of crowd that they want, the density of population that they want. Those are the kind of things I think people are used to looking for. It's going beyond that level and understanding things like, there's sites, and then there's all of the what goes into developing the restaurant that are a bunch of hidden costs that if the space itself doesn't lend itself to be a restaurant, it can cost you, way more to renovate a place. I always have people talk to me about second generation restaurants and how they want one of those because it's cheaper. And, 9 times out of 10, it's about the same cost.
Yeah.
So once you get what you want. So there's tons of factors to look at. I wish I could just simplify it in one thing, but that's the whole point, is you got to have you got to take a lot of things into account before you make the plunge.
Yeah, it's good. It's why I want to bring it up, is because a lot of times we're just tunnel vision again. And I want to make sure that we understand there's a lot of questions to ask. There's a lot of boxes to check. Absolutely. Jonathan, I want to jump over to you on the investment side, right? I want to talk about that for just a second. And Ken mentioned some of the costs of kind of operating when you're thinking about tenant improvement money, when you're thinking about the build out cost per square foot, $250 per square foot of a build out is kind of a starting spot. What are some of the things that you're talking about with your tenants or potential tenants on the way they need to be thinking about how capitalized they are going into a project?
Well, I think there's the side of the capital improvements, the tenant improvements that the landlord's paying for. And I think on a heavily built out restaurant, that's likely not going to get them all the way. So it's going to be a percentage of what their total costs are. So in understanding that, then it's really from a landlord's perspective, we know what we're providing. And in most cases, we're providing a restaurant shell. So we've got enough power, we got a grease trap, we've got, enough HVAC and RTU capacity for a restaurant. Beyond that, then we provide a TI allowance. And again, I'll use an example of, I don't know that we've done a $250 square foot allowance, but say we have a $50 allowance, we know it's going to be $100, then we know the tenant's putting in another $50 a square foot. So it's really understanding how are they capitalizing that? Where's that money coming from? Is it equity? Is it a partner? Is it an SBA loan? What is it? Because again, we need to make sure that, I think we have an understanding. We've capitalized our side of the project. We know what we're going to invest. We just need to understand how they're capitalizing their side of the investment.
And so with that, right now in this moment, as a lot of wagons are circling, there's a lot of uncertainty, not sure where money's going to come from for investment. We were we forgot, like in the last 12 years, there's been so much money, especially in food and beverage, retail, restaurant, hospitality, a lot of investment. It was easy in comparison to get funding. Give us a little bit of an understanding from your perspective. Is it going to be as easy? Is it going to be a lot more competition for funding dollars to be able to open your dream restaurant? Just quick little insights there.
Yeah, and again, I think that it's going to be a more challenging market on the tenant side in terms of, new tenants coming to the market, new tenants wanting to open. And so I think they're going to be demanding more of the landlord side. So I think there's going to be a higher expectation from tenants that either the landlord contribute more, or as Ken suggested, they're looking at, second generation space that they can renovate or retrofit as inexpensively as possible. But I think, and the flip side of that too is, and we've had some conversations with, a handful of restaurants recently about, and one of the things we always ask is share your budget with us. Let us help you look at that. We may have pieces that we think are too expensive that you shouldn't be paying that much for. But it also gives us a chance to look at something and go, ask them the question of, do you really need that? Is that critical to the success of your restaurant? And if by overspending up front, you're putting yourself in a hole. So what can you do as cost effectively as possible where you may not get everything you want? But I think that metric is really important now of, again, not getting behind the 8 ball when you just start out.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Amy, I'm going to come to you here in a second. I want to start talking about leases a little bit. But to that point, and I've seen this, I've been in the situation of, did we really need to spend $500,000 on our fast casual project? No. We get so focused on the minutia of, I need this light fixture, that light fixture. We don't think about the lighting in the space. And then all of a sudden you're so far behind the 8 ball, as Jonathan mentions, that you start cutting and controlling. And the way that you do that is your prime costs of cutting and controlling the cost of your food and how much you pay people. And we've seen that be a detrimental practice in the industry. So having transparency and understanding where you're spending your money, I could not agree with more. All right, Amy, for you, leases. Lease construction is going to be a little bit different. I think of speaking to Ty McKinstry recently. We just talked about force majeure, and I was like, I didn't know that force majeure was even a clause that had the potential to be negotiated. I've never seen that altered ever in any of the dozens of leases that I've seen or been a part of. So let's talk about lease construction. Give us an idea of the few of the ways that you see leases being altered, being different, being a new expectation kind of moving forward past COVID.
Right. Well, to your point, I think a lot of things that may not have been on the table, especially for the smaller tenants, may now be on the table. And at the end of the day, I think the important part is to look for protections for issues that may be outside of your control. For example, including a permit contingency in your lease. So if you can't obtain your permits within a certain amount of time, then you have the right to terminate, or tying rent commencement and your build out to your receipt of permits, because we're seeing, especially in Denver, a slowdown in the permitting process due to COVID. And if you're ready and raring to go with your GC, but you simply don't have permits in hand, you could be running into issues of dead rent, which everyone wants to avoid. So I think that's really important to cover yourself, especially in places where you may not have all the control. I think another issue we're going to see on the table that we don't very often is a co-tenancy provision, to ensure that if you're in a big center or like a Edgewater market type of situation, and you don't want to be the only tenant operating in there. So to try to make your operations contingent on the operations of other tenants surrounding you, because at the end of the day, you don't want to be a lone operator in a center or a space where people aren't coming to go to your business. I think force majeure generally is the hard part about force majeure, I would say in 90% of leases I look at, it expressly says that force majeure is not a reason to not pay rent or other amounts due under your lease. So in terms of COVID, it's not very helpful in providing rent relief, because at the end of the day, it's meant to cover delays. That being said, I think we're going to start to see more added protections in leases to protect tenants in the event that, hopefully not, but another pandemic or epidemic comes along, or in the event of governmental shutdowns or limited operations. So things to consider, again, a dead rent is of course the biggest, then of course to avoid issues where it's outside of your control.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And so one of the things, again, it's going to be relationships and communications. To a point that you made, it just kind of like triggered me. I remember when we were going to open a restaurant, Slotted Spoon, and the first location that we looked at was the original location of the first Chipotle on Evans near Denver University. And we modeled so much of what we were doing after Steve L's and Chipotle that we just had to be in that location. And we barely got out by the skin of our teeth of not signing that lease because there were so many red flags that we just weren't paying attention to, because it was our dream location. It's where Chipotle started. Like, imagine that story for us was more important than all the concessions we started making. And to your point, one of them was that we did not have a contingency for not being able to acquire a liquor license. Right. And then we could have potentially gone up against dead rent. And finally, we walked away from that location. It's that you need to have a strong relationship with your landlord. And if they're not willing to work with you, that needs to be a red flag. So, Jonathan, they definitely didn't have 5 changes in their leases when we were looking at that location. So I want to come over to Ken. Ken, now we're talking about the lease a little bit, and you're going to get basically kind of the letter of intent and all of that over to Amy, over to the attorney side. And I just want to layer on top of that. She mentioned a couple of things that are a little bit different right now. What are the conversations that you're having with clients, with potential clients, as they're looking at scouting locations specific to what their leases are going to look like? Let's unmute you there. There we go.
Thank you. I'll just kind of mimic some of the things that Amy brought up, but there's a lot more attention on unforeseen events that we can figure out how to craft around those in a letter of intent that we can sort of protect our clients for. It's one of those situations where nobody has any verbiage for that yet, because this is the first time it happened, thank God. So we're having to go through and try to get landlords comfortable with language that protects in case of something that is completely out of their hands, and really more so the government mandated stuff is really unusual and certainly has never happened in American history before. So it's a very tough thing to cover in a lease. So those kinds of things are probably not going to get addressed even today, because they just it's too broad and too big of a topic. But definitely some of the other things like occupancy and protecting yourself from forced closures of other kinds. I think that is definitely something that can be covered, and you can even do something specific to like a COVID type situation, a pandemic situation where it's a medical emergency. I saw that for the first time in a national lease that I just did, and they were adamant to have the language, and they were able to fight it and get it in. With a lot of caveats. So I think you'll see a lot of that kind of stuff, but it's still the most important thing I think for people to keep track of is the basic blocking and tackling of leases and keeping themselves protected from the basic issues instead of going for things that are really very, very unlikely.
Makes sense. All right, Ken, I want to go into the physical space. Ken, I want to touch on with you just for a second, and then Chris, I want to come to you. So the physical space, we see those altering massively with the need for to-go, with more contactless dining. I see people starting to cut out walls to be able to pick up windows, things like that. I also know that there's going to be a vacuum of the 3,500 to 5,000 square foot spaces, right? There's going to be sub 2,000 and below, and huge 20,000 and above, like you see the middle getting sucked out a little bit of kind of those chef driven 100-seat restaurants that I came up with in the industry. So let's talk about the physical space. What's happening right now? Are you seeing spaces that were 5,000 square feet get cut in half and getting a wall put up to have 2 units? Like, give us a little bit of that specifically to the square footage of spaces.
Well, I think this is definitely something that the landlords can jump in and help with, and are excited to help with. I think one thing that we'll see is that the trends that were successful and driving the business prior to COVID, they're going to come back. And so, as example, something like Edgewater Public Market, that is a food hall environment, shared environment with a lot of common space, a lot of outdoor space, both at the ground level and rooftop patios and things like that are shared by all the tenants. And I think what happens is you tackle this issue of being spaced apart, but it can also really help the tenants in rent, because they're just not having to rent as much space as they did before. So that's definitely one way that I'm definitely seeing that happen a lot, even on a small level, where you're taking a 5,000 square foot space and splitting it in half, and then you're extending patios, and you're putting in drive-throughs that aren't necessarily for drive-through ordering, but through pickup only. I see that happening a lot. So I think that's where the landlords are really going to be able to jump in and make some differences. I know at one of Jonathan's projects at 35th and Larimer, he actually took the approach where he cut into the ground floor of what could have been leasable space and turned that into outdoor seating area, which changes the game for restaurants, and certainly has been a very important in this COVID deal. So I think you'll see some decisions like that being made in the future a lot.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Our Carissa, right on that point, you and I discussed how you have a massive amount of outdoor seating at Brazen, and you have a good relationship with your landlord, and they own the park next door, and you've been able to expand on that a little bit. Maybe just touch on that, the importance of having a relationship with a landlord that allows you the opportunity to be what you told me was you were at the same sales generation as you were, year to date last year, which is unbelievable. Like certain segments like pizza and like pure to go food are up, but basically everybody else is treading water. For you to be there because of some effort from your landlord, like talk about the relationship side there.
Yeah, sure. So our building, our space is located on Old Elitch's property. So our patio backs up to the carousel gazebo and the private park right there that is owned and managed by our landlord. And part of our triple net goes to maintain that space. So we pay for that space too, as do some of our neighbors. We are really fortunate to have a large patio, which was one of the things when we opened a restaurant we wanted, because as Coloradans, we all like to enjoy the sun and take advantage of it as much as we can. So that was a really big driving factor for us. And like you said, there are compromises, but you have to find out what's important to you. And a patio space was really important to us. And we're really thankful that we have that right now for sure. Having a good landlord relationship is important. I think at the end of the day, they want us to pay our rent, and we need the space to pay rent. And we're just lucky that space next to our patio is also privately owned by them. So we've been setting up tables and chairs in the park and Adirondack chairs as far as our servers want to walk, and as many seats as our kitchen can handle, and taking advantage of that space because it's a benefit to us to be able to make our numbers and to the landlord to be able to pay our rent. And so it's all working out so far. A little nervous to see what winter brings, because our indoor space is 1,500 square feet, including kitchen and bathrooms. So
then let's maybe look forward to that. Any other plans for the layout of your location as you anticipate not having that space, cutting out walls for to-go windows? Ken mentioned the drive-through. Like, how else are you thinking about the physical space as a way to kind of deploy against whatever happens next? And we don't know what that is really, but you got a game plan, right?
Yeah. So when the COVID shutdown happened and we weren't allowed to do dine-in at all, I did work every day with my husband hand in hand in the operations of the restaurant and pivoting. We pivoted our menu to a more takeout friendly menu. Nobody really wants a medium rare steak to go and then get home and have it not the right temperature. And so, we pivoted to more braised meats and sides and kid friendly and family friendly and just stuff that reheated well or kept, its temperature and essence to go. So when we were doing takeout, I think our sales were about 40% of what they should have been. But, we were able to pay the bills that we had to pay because a lot of things were frozen just while everyone's waiting to get triple P. And then looking forward to winter, we're still keeping a really friendly takeout menu and family friendly, because if that happens again, that's where we will be. We did a big, massive push for marketing. Can I talk about that really fast?
Might as well. Yeah, we're here to market food and beverage, right?
So one of our previous servers, Catherine Rudy, and if anyone wants her information, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to
plug. I like it.
She is awesome. She reached out to me. She usually sends those text messages that you get from spas for massages or facials. Book now and you get 20% off, right? So we were able to take our open table guest list and send out text messages to 9,000 previous guests and just let them know, here's our takeout menu, or we're doing takeout. Here's a link to our menu, 10% off if you order using this code. And the day we started that, during the COVID shutdown with takeout, our sales doubled. So it was just getting the word out, because all of us were in uncharted territory. Nobody knew who was open, who wasn't, what hours it was. And it was effort to order takeout food, to just find someone who was open and what they're serving what you wanted, So we tried to put that out there, and it really helped too.
I like it. I'm going to tie it back to the physical space, because I am a big proponent and talk a lot about how you need to be creating revenues outside of your four walls, because your four walls are only so big. And especially if you don't have the outdoor, you're going to have to figure out ways to be dynamic to maximize the use of your space. That we used to think about how many butts and seats that we could put. Now it's what's going to be our output when it comes to revenue. And that's going to include things like being dynamic in marketing like we never have been before, touching tables through social media that are not inside your four walls. I'm a big believer in that. So that's my back to the space. I think marketing is going to really develop the way that we utilize our space within restaurants more differently than ever before. Amy,
program, one more thing was it allowed me to message guests privately. So if they could responded a question, I could respond. It was a whole app. If they ordered dinner, I could see that they called in, and the next day I could message them and say, hey, how was dinner? We would love your honest feedback. So we were able to touch those tables in a marketing way.
That's it. It's part of the new word of mouth. I'm a big believer in that. All right, Amy, for you, legal protection for businesses as outdoor has expanded. There's a lot of loose language about what's happening with liquor license extending to outdoor spaces, things like that. What's some of what you are advising? And to be clear, Amy is not giving anybody legal advice. She will not be doing that on a show. However, what is some of the things that we should be thinking about when we're positioning ourselves? Is this good? I feel like I'm doing a good job of protecting you here.
You're doing a great job.
What we should be thinking about when making sure that we're not putting ourselves in a position that if we're not able to utilize our outdoor space because of weather or because of legal constraints, that we might be vulnerable.
Right. I think the big part here is to recognize that everyone is doing their best, whether that be at the state level, the government level, to try to expand these programs so restaurants can be successful. That being said, there is an obligation on the restaurant side to keep up to date. These things are changing daily, monthly, weekly. So it's important to make sure that you are staying up to date on your end in terms of what the new ordinances are, what's allowed, what's required, in terms of the expansion of the patios, which I think is a great, valuable tool that Denver and other cities have done. And it's so fun to drive around and see all these expanded patios everywhere. But just being very cautious, just because there is a pandemic, it doesn't mean that everything's open off the table and it's a free for all. You still have liability for alcohol. Your liquor license is still on the table. If you, at the end of the day, be smart, be kept up to date as to what's going on. And if you have any questions, call the city. They're more than happy to answer questions for you. Call your attorney, call our office, but don't fly by the seat of your pants. Make sure you're doing things the right way, because it could have drastic lasting effects on you in the event you do something wrong. And everyone's making mistakes. We're all doing the best that we can, but ensuring that you're keeping up to date with the ordinances, following social distancing requirements, patio requirements, things like that are pretty much non-negotiable. So don't risk your liquor license just so you can have a patio. I promise you, it won't be worth it.
And have you had to go and put out fires, as I mentioned before, with some of these issues coming to play? Like, is that?
We have.
Yeah.
I don't think it's intentional, because again, everyone's trying their best to keep up, because everything is changing so often. But what we're seeing most of all are people calling us and saying, I just want to make sure I'm doing this correctly. And we'll see things like, ooh, don't do that, or change this. And that's the best way to do it. I mean, we're all human. Everyone makes mistakes. But just try to keep on top of that. Again, you mentioned before, you don't want to have a fire drill 911 and call me when you're wondering if you're doing something correctly. It will be less expensive than the fire drill. It will be longer lasting than the fire drill. So we have seen it. Again, I have yet to see someone intentionally violating anything. It's more so people just not being aware of an ordinance change or a requirement in terms of the patio expansions, but nothing that we haven't been able to deal with.
Nothing egregious. Yeah, just be aware everything's shifting hour by hour. So make sure that you're just very diligent and making sure whatever you did yesterday, unfortunately, may not be what's expected today. So Jonathan, Ken mentioned that you knocked out the floor on a potential unit to kind of extend something. So from your perspective, as we're talking about outdoor spaces, expanding spaces, reimagining what the spaces are like, cutting them in half, what are a few of the things that you're focused on right now to try and support your locations, your projects, your tenants, and kind of the future of a lot of your projects that are so deeply rooted in kind of hospitality and restaurants?
Yeah, I'll answer that two ways. Using the project that Ken used as an example, that was a location where we could have built lot line to lot line. That's really typically not how we develop. So, by not doing that, we were able to create a really interesting outdoor courtyard space, and we did it at two different locations. So, that I think today is actually working out really well for those users. An example of what are we trying to do on our end right now, Edgewater is a really good example. I mean, we were fortunate that a part of the food hall and the retail hall, we were able to apply for and successfully got common consumption. So we had the opportunity that, we had two different liquor licenses that anchored that project. You could get a drink at either one, go through the hall, get your food, and mingle through the retail. So we had that set up. When COVID hit and they shut down both the retail and the food, and then we gradually opened for takeout, we were able to expand our common consumption outside, which then allowed us to put, tents, not unlike I think a lot of people have seen what Stanley did. We did something fairly similar, but really we're able to double what the seating capacity had been through the use of outdoor space. And we went to the city. They were great to work with. They said, don't worry about the fact that you're using parking. We know we have ordinances that, in your PUD provided for so much parking. They were conceded that and said, no, it's more important that you do something to obviously keep your tenants in business. So we were able to expand outside, and it's made a big difference. I mean, it literally doubled the seating capacity of the hall. So, those are things you just have to respond to. And I think that's the kind of thinking that's going to go into, fortunately, hopefully we'll get out of this and we won't have to be thinking so defensively, and we can be a little more offensive again. I think it's a matter of how we look at space creatively. One of the things that I think will be interesting going forward is I think more tenants and on the restaurant side look at this recent experience and say it used to be nice to have a patio, now it's a requisite. I have to have that, and so in a development. And then from the developer side, and this is where there's always that rub, outdoor space is very expensive. It's expensive because it's giving up developable areas. So the question then being, can you get to a point where, yes, we want to provide that outdoor space, but can a tenant also pay for, does that become part of their lease so that their premises gets expanded where they're taking both indoor and outdoor space? as part of it, because those costs are getting integrated into the project costs. So how does that get recovered? And that may be, I think, in terms of leasing standpoint, one thing we may see more of is that some restaurants and tents may be more willing to pay for outdoor space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And so when you're looking at the projects that you currently have, right, what we're talking about is like you're going to have to reimagine some of the future ones. Is there anything else besides outdoor space that's like coming up in conversation, in action that you're taking? Again, I'm thinking about the physical space. Is there anything else that people are going to be thinking about as a way that they can evolve their physical space that you guys are working on?
I think in going to this concept about takeout, and Ken was suggesting drive-through more for takeout than simply ordering. The types of projects that we do really don't in most cases allow for kind of the drive-through kind of. They just drive-throughs are really complicated, for one, because of how you access the site, and they're very site consumptive. So, again, for the infill, we've done one on an infill project, and it was a fair amount of brain damage, actually. So I think in terms of that, we're probably not the developer that's going to be doing that. I think in a suburban location where you've got more land to play with, sure, I see that happening. I think it's really going to be a matter of, a lot of the inside space about how is there going to be bar, or is the takeout going to be at the bar? And so is there not seating at the bar? And so how are those things evolving? Not so much on our side, other than, we can help in the space planning process and I think, make those kinds of suggestions. I don't know that we've had a bunch of tenants come to us and saying we absolutely have to have a takeout window. I don't know that we've seen that yet. But I think the place where it's really going to matter is outdoor seating. And where we can provide more of that, or we can look at reusing or repurposing parking for that purpose, we'll do it. We'll figure out a way to help.
All right, appreciate it. All right, really good stuff. We could talk for 5 more hours and barely scratch the surface. I want to give everyone the last 60 seconds, just kind of as you are distilling down everything we've talked about, anything that is still on your mind that we haven't touched on. I'll just go around the table and just give us kind of your parting shots, last thoughts. Carissa, for you?
Well, you talked about restaurant P&Ls, I think, in a previous episode, but just when you're thinking about running the business, because cooking is the easy part, making sure that, your lease rent is not more than 7%, 10% at the max, but you're not going to be profitable if you're paying too much.
I appreciate that. Yeah, the occupancy cost, again, something we hear triple net. Right, common area maintenance charges, really, really understanding those additional sunk costs that you have, I think is very important. And 8 to 10% of occupancy costs has been the industry norm. We're probably going to see a push towards how do you get that creatively to 7%, 7.24%, because that 2.5% difference can make all the difference in the viability of restaurants. So I appreciate that, Carissa. Ken, for you,
your lease goes up in price every year too, and your triple net, where your profitability might go
understand
down.
Again, short-term versus long-term. We got to start thinking more mid and long-term in restaurants. Ken, for you, what's some parting shots? What do you got for us?
Well, I think that what's interesting about this whole COVID thing is that restaurants became an essential use. And I think that's something that we should keep in mind, because they're in line now with emergency services and things that we thought we couldn't live without. And so that's something that has absolutely changed in the kind of American psyche out there. And I think that's going to keep going. And I guess my thought is that people in the restaurant business shouldn't be disheartened. I think they're in a very good position if they're here in Denver, Colorado, or Colorado in general, because I think we're going to end up being in a lot better position than most of the country when this does start to shake out. And when you start to see things like the housing market being strong and sales increasing rather than decreasing, and the amount of people still coming into the city without jobs being created, that's kind of an interesting stat. And that means that people want to live here. And I think some of the things like staying at home to work right now feel like they are destroying our business. And I think long term, it becomes something that now you have more ways to expand into these markets where people are at home all the time instead of at work all the time. And it's opening up new markets all over the place instead of just in one condensed area. So there's going to be positives out of every negative. And I think that unfortunately, you'll see a lot of restaurants shutter, and that's unfortunate, but it also is an opportunity for other restaurants to come in and try it their way after this is over. So I think every time something has a downturn, there's going to be an upside to it. And our job is to just keep cranking and putting out good product. And frankly, that is worth gold. I'm telling you, when it comes to the actual operations of these shopping centers and buildings and places that need retail, finding quality operators is the hardest part by far. Building the space is not the hard part. Sorry, Jonathan, but the hard part is operating those things effectively.
Just like the food is the easy part. I really appreciate that. Everybody who's in restaurants listening, watching this, you are essential. It has been deemed so. It has been written, and it really, really matters. We see, again, restaurants are the pillar of their community, which is why the idea of the Paragon pillars, something I've been talking about for years and years, of basically shifting completely on its head our employee retention, satisfaction, and our percentages. We see the need absolutely to invest in the future of a more equitable, profitable, and sustainable restaurant model, because you are essential. Ken, appreciate that. For you, Amy, any last thoughts? Anything we need to know to protect ourselves, to go out in the world? Anything you want to leave us with?
I think overall, viewing an attorney is less as a luxury and more as a necessity, especially upfront with your business. To Chris's point, include that as a line item on your P&L in terms of lease negotiation costs, as well as throughout the term of your lease, there are going to be issues that come up, amendments and other ancillary documents. So, again, we're not a luxury, we're a necessity, and we're here to help you. And finally, and I think this was brought up and it's so important, I want to stress it again, don't be afraid to foster a good relationship with your landlords. You are in this potentially 10, 20, 30-year deal together. And the better of a relationship you have with your landlord, to Carissa's point and example, the better you both will be in the long run. And I think that's a very valuable piece that I think people may not have in the past been so focused on. So I think it's super crucial that you do that.
And remember, look, they have mortgages too. They took on debt to be able to do these projects. Like, it needs to be win-win. Win-win. Absolutely. They're stakeholders and partners, not even landlords. We're going to get rid of that term. We should have started that here. After this episode, no more landlords. They are your four-wall partner, whatever. We're going to come up with a new term, but I think it's important to recognize.
That's a long defined term to include in a lease.
Yeah.
Johnson.
We're going to work on that. We're going to get into the legal language of leases to change the moniker of landlord, because that is an old English term of domination. So anyway, I digress, but I think it's pretty important. And like landlords, look, there's some bad eggs, there's some bad operators in restaurants, there's some bad attorneys, there's some bad brokers. There just is. You need to have that strong relationship. And I can tell you, talking about making takeout windows and people cutting holes in the walls, I've cut holes in walls with Jonathan. The guy will get his hands dirty. So the kind of landlord you want to have a relationship with, for sure. Jonathan, last thoughts for you as we kind of go. I like that there was the potential for this to be like, beat the crap out of your landlord because now you have the leverage in this moment. And I absolutely did not want it to be that, because this isn't a buyer-seller's real estate market. It's about creating partnerships for the longevity. Right. So I appreciate that. It didn't digress into that, but last thoughts for you, Jonathan.
Yeah, and I'd say it again. I think it's really important on the capitalization. Go in well capitalized. Don't assume that after 60 days you're going to be making money. Assume that you're going to be making money a year later, and have that capitalization to get past that. The other part of it, and have a plan. We had Ken and I were working with a tenant at Edgewater. He came to me and told me what the concept was, and I'm like, no way. Weren't going there, wasn't cool, wasn't anything. And I said, all right, I don't get what she's going to do. Send me a business plan. I read this plan and called him up and said, done, go get her. She was awesome. She could articulate what she wanted to do, and it made all the difference. So have a plan. Have somebody that, you're not just, out there kind of wandering around, kind of aimlessly trying to figure out what you want to do. Have a solid plan, and it makes a difference. And if you can put it on paper and articulate it, even better. And then lastly, again, to repeat, everybody said, talk to your landlord. When you're failing and you're about to move out, that's not the time to call me. We are in this together. Don't wait to that point to call. So
I appreciate that. All right. Thank you to everyone. Carissa, Amy, Ken, Jonathan. We're going to let you guys all go. I'm going to wrap up with the audience real quick. Thank you so much for the time, the insights. I really appreciate it. We got a lot more work to do. We laid some great foundation. So you all four, have a great evening. Cheers. All right. Okay. Great episode. I think real estate, we have a lot of opportunity to reimagine what's happening in real estate. Again, it is such a big ticket item. There's so much upfront that goes into selecting your four-wall location, figuring out your lease, getting capitalized, and getting into operation, and the relationships and communication really, really matter. The biggest thing is, once again, have trusted people that you can speak to, understand that you need to invest the time and effort to understand what they're saying to you, and check all of the boxes. There are, to the nth degree, more boxes than people in restaurants recognize. I'm very well studied, and was when I was going into my own locations. I still had no idea. And I think that's the normal. We need to be very aware of that, and we need to find strong partners. That is the key to this. It is not about negotiating your leveraged position. It is about having the opportunity to create, again, the longevity of the more equitable, profitable, sustainable model. That's how we bring a coalition of stakeholders together so that everybody can work together. Imagine if you're going for this 19% net profit, because we understand that that's what it takes for the viability of the long term of restaurants and the industry to be successful, that all 147 line items in your P&L are all humans or businesses, products or services that understand the value of restaurants in the ecosystem of community and commerce. And then you say, we're going to be coming up short because of X, Y, and Z, unforeseen 3%. And you go to your partners and say, we need 3% because we got to stay at that target 19%. We've all decided that that was the best thing for us. And somebody finds a 0.5% here, 0.25% there, 1% there to get you through the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. It'll make a difference versus feeling that you need to out negotiate the other guy to get the cheapest price. You want the best opportunity. And I'm ranting, but that's what I'm here to do. I appreciate all of you for watching. Appreciate the panel, Gabby and Fireside at 5 for being such great partners. Andrew Parr, as always, dropping gold with all the great comments. And if you don't know, Andrew Parr works on the Paragon Pillars. He's with Angry Olive Consulting, and you see his articles. So look out for our pages. You'll see articles about recaps, and you'll see a recap of this and all of the chats with additional shared resources, so you can go deeper down the rabbit hole to get more and more educated on what will be the best personal decision for you and your business. Check out chat 1, 2, 3 on the Best Served podcast Facebook and YouTube pages, as well as Fireside at 5 Facebook and YouTube pages. And next week, we wrap the 5-part series. I'm so grateful. This has been an awesome experience. And we wrap talking about legislature, about regulation, about how we can understand the opportunity to, again, invest in the future of restaurants, what's needed from restaurants, what the challenges and opportunities therein are. Tuesday, August 4th, 5 p.m. Mountain Time. You'll be able to check that out. And I appreciate it. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak with all of you, with the panel. That's all I got for you. Have a great evening. Cheers.